Well, today I'm not going to talk about my usual stuff about politics, philosophy or history. I'm going to, well, to me a bit of new ground, which is social psychology. So I would like to ask to all psychologists, psychiatrists to be mild to me and give a constructive criticism, because what I'm going to talk about is actually work in progress. So, right. After many conferences of crick here in Oxford, I started actually to ask last year, I mean, could there be some kind of link between people, or between the characteristics of the psychology of people that believe in conspiracy theories, that vote for extreme right or left parties, and people that join terrorist groups? And if so, what could this link be? And what I try to do is a kind of give a theoretical a framework of what I think could be linking these groups. Before I continue, I had a talk with John in London in the House of Lords, and my idea was actually that it was about complexity. So going back to the talks we heard before, and that people have difficulties with, for example, irreversibility, non-linearity, unpredictability, and so forth. But there's one reason why I changed this idea a little bit, and this is actually the next, well, one of the next slides. So conspiracy theories, which is the first thing, it's, well, you know what conspiracy theories are. So, and the reason why I doubted about complexity is that people who believe in conspiracy theories actually make sometimes easy things extremely complex. So they're looking for patterns where there are none and giving people agency where they have none. We all know the QAnon, where they believe that Hillary Clinton and her, how they call it, cabal, are from some pizza restaurant, actually having a huge conspiracy where they eat children and so forth. So to explain what, you know, the same with COVID-19, which was just a virus, and people had amazingly complex explanations of why this was not just a virus. Now, interestingly enough is that, well, people who identify with the left, I mean, they're more inclined to give agency to billionaires, bankers, and soldiers, while those who are more on the right would say that agency, it's Muslims or scientists who are actually ruling the world. To my surprise is that I found a survey that said that actually half of the American people believes in one conspiracy or another. So it is quite a huge part of the population that is going that path. Now the question is, who believes in it? So, and according to some Van Prooijen, who is a Dutch scholar, he says that actually what pushes people to conspiracy theories is fear and uncertainty, which makes people being more vigilant, and so they're trying to construct theories that keeps the danger to a distance. However, Swami, for example, who says that people with higher capacity of analytical thinking will be less inclined to conspiracy theories. And again, Van Prooijen says it's the same is true for people with higher education. In other words, people who are attracted to conspiracy theories are actually less smart. I mean, that's what they say. However, interestingly enough, is with the research that I've been trying to look at, is that although education and so analytical thinking probably is a predicting factor, it's true, it is not fully predictive. So there is somewhere a gap in this thinking. Let's go to the second thing, extreme political beliefs and populism. I assume you all know what populism is. So, but one of the interesting things is that it's about also moral superiority. I mean, they are always against elites. And interesting is that populists actually offer a cognitive certainty and simplicity, a positive identity, and so the promise for collective redemption. Again, the simplicity that we see, the simplicity, complexity answers, which is one of the big theories in social psychology, is one of the aspects that people say, well, if you believe in populism, you can't deal with complexity as such. But I think, again, it's perhaps more complicated than that. Who is attracted to it? Well, again, the word uncertainty is mentioned in most studies, the focus on self-uncertainty, and the aversion to uncertainty, according to very recent studies, leads people to stereotyping, essentialism, and moralism. Now I'm going to a point that I know Scott knows very well, which is the studies of Kruglanski, who says actually there are two things that push people, or that, let's say, characterize the psychology of people that are being pushed to populism. The one is the need for significance, and the other one is a need for cognitive closure. This means that you don't like uncertainty, you don't like situations that are unpredictable, so in a way it's close to complexity, and the fear of complexity, the fear of unpredictability, so but combined with significance, collectively and individually, and they find their responses, their answers with populists, of course, like Make America Great Again. Now I'm going to go on a topic that we have discussed here a lot, certainly, of course, by Scott, and his concepts of devoted actors who believe in sacred values, certainly after themselves or their group has been humiliated. So, like Harvey's study on identity fusion, where people are even getting more radicalized and willingness to fight, and as Scott also mentioned in 2010, that charismatic leadership helps some people to be willing to fight. Now, the question behind, of course, this is the question, who wants to become a devoted actor? Who becomes such an actor? And again, and I'm referring now to Kruglanski because, again, Scott, you also refer to him in at least one of your texts, is that, again, the psychological drivers, the need of significance and the need for cognitive closure comes into the game. Well, the need for significance is being recognized as a very substantial human motive. I mean, it's not just radical people who do that. I mean, people who are wanting to become professor, people who want to become Olympic medalists and so forth, they all have a need for significance. So it is nothing of course, that is substantially negative, well, rather on the contrary. But of course, if it is combined with substantial loss of humiliation, it might be turning into something else. However, this need for significance is obviously hard to measure. At least I haven't seen any measurement of that. So I think that it might be interesting to focus a bit more on this need for closure, because people who are scoring high on these tests of need for closure, actually they value order, they dislike ambiguity, they want to make that decisions are made, and they want to have quickly formed impressions and have usually also strong opinions. It doesn't just test certainty, but also predictability, decisiveness, avoidance of ambiguity, and closed-mindedness. Now, the question is, after this kind of overview, what was keeping me awake at night is there a connection between these three? So between the people, the psychology of the people who believe in conspiracy theories, who vote for populist parties, and actually who are able to radicalize if the situation is there. And Engelhardt, in already 1987, showed that there is a relationship between extreme political beliefs and conspiracy theories on the extreme left and the extreme right. So there is a connection between both. Again, Kruglanski said that there is also a relationship with those who support populist parties and those who are able to radicalize because of his need for significance and closure. So, going back to the first slides, actually, is the question, is this about education? Can we say that people who are more educated are per definition excluded from these three forms of, well, I would say perhaps strange behavior. So, and as a matter of fact, education is a kind of reliable predictor. So, and one example is indeed Brexit. I was very surprised to see there was a study in 2016 to see what was predicting people's choice for a no or yes in Brexit. And the authors of the study presumed that it was going to be all socio-economic factors or geographical factors. So people living in cities like London would, of course, vote less to leave the EU. To their surprise, actually, the most predicting factor was indeed education. So it was not socioeconomic factors. And a study of Feldman about authoritarianism also shows that high authoritarians, that believe that immigration and so forth is a threat, they're usually lower in education. In other words, the higher education, the lower your score on authoritarianism. So all this points out that indeed education might be the most important predicting factor. However, and now it becomes interesting, that in the same study of Feldman, which is very recent, 2021 it was published, it appears that on the very right-wing side of the spectrum, that it doesn't really matter if you have a university degree or not. So, in other words, if you are a white American, it was an American study, a white American who scores high on nationalism, anti-migration, racism, authoritarianism, and so forth, you don't score lower on these scales if you are highly educated. So this puts a serious question on the education theory, on the fringe at least, on the right side of the spectrum. So, and there's one thing more. Just take a glass of water. There was a highly interesting study that was made by West Point a few years ago, where they had found 4,600 ISIS profile files. So just found them somewhere in Syria. Everyone who went to ISIS had to fill in a paper where they explained who they came from, what is their education, background, and so forth. And the most important result of this study was that there was no line really in this group. It was not about the uneducated, it was not about the unemployed, or about just the people who were not married. Everything was mixed. But one thing was actually pretty interesting is that indeed there were quite a few people who had a degree. And from the people who had a degree, the ones overrepresented were law, engineering, and economics. I'm going to a study of Gambetta and Hertog from 2009, who studied a lot, a few hundred of Islamic extremists who were known to have indeed a university degree. 44 of them were engineers, and engineering, medicine, and science represented in total almost 60% of the ones having a degree. And from the ones coming from the West, it was the same picture. So a lot of engineers, natural science, economics, business, and accountancy. So, if education can predict a lesser degree of belief in conspiracy theories and so forth, and radicalization, but there is a gap, is it possible that this gap is to be found on the side of engineering, natural science, medicine, law, and economics? My hypothesis is that degree is not just the only thing. And degree is, of course, linked to IQ. IQ and education are, there are many studies who say that IQ predicts education, education predicts IQ. So I was wondering, first of all, do we need to test perhaps some kind of CQ, some complexity test, which are now made into UQ, some kind of certainty test, which might perhaps predict better if people are going to conspiracy theories, extremists, and populists than anything else. And if that's true, that might indeed explain why this part of these studies that say, at least on the right side of the study, there is some there is no difference if you are educated or not to believe in authoritarianism and so forth. There's still a few remaining questions. So I think for those who know tests, that a combination of this need for closure test and an actively open-minded test might be good enough. The question is it good enough? Secondly, what about the extreme left? In the same study of 2009, if you go to the extreme left organizations, like for example the Rote Armee-Fraktion in the 60s and the 70s, people with a philosophy degree were actually overrepresented. So this is of course 50, 60 years ago. And in any case, I think I will need a good psychologist to answer this question and also start with the testing. But one final remark, and that actually brought me also to this, is might it be true that this problem is actually increasing because we get less and less abstract courses in our education, like indeed languages, like indeed even religion or philosophy, history and so forth, and more focusing on practical things in which A+1 is 2, which is of course a certainty, and maybe we need some more education in uncertainty. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Koert.